Le Nissan Kick-Play 2025 a beaucoup de plus. Apple CarPlay intégré pour jouer vos tunes préférées, des fonctions avancées de sécurité, un rendement énergétique remarquable, puis même la petite odeur de char neuf qu'on aime tant. Tout ça en plus pour moins. Le Nissan Kick Play 2025 est le véhicule neuf le plus abordable au Québec. Achetez-le à partir de seulement 22 774 $, incluant un rabais à l'achat comptant de 2 600 $. Profitez de cette offre avantageuse chez votre concessionnaire dès maintenant. Jusqu'au 2 mars, des conditions s'appliquent. Détails chez Nissan.
I gave a mandate to Simon to see what can be done. We received a report with 42 recommendations, so it's not only a constitution, but I think we have to make sure that we protect our language and our values. And in our values, I include secularism and equality between men and women.
So those were some of François Legault's comments last week on Friday. There he is talking about a Quebec constitution, right, and some recommendations that came from a provincial committee on how to exert more power for the province of Quebec, especially within the confines of Canadian federalism. Also coming out of that melee with the press, the end of session at the National Assembly, is François Legault talking about perhaps looking into banning public prayer, and even using the notwithstanding clause in order to get some mechanism into place. Let's now go to constitutional lawyer Frédéric Berard. He's also a partner at GBM Lawyers. Frédéric, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this, because I think for a lot of people, and we've talked to our listeners a couple of times about this over the last week, there are some people who are exasperated with public prayer that they deem actually goes beyond public prayer and is actually intimidation. And they believe that there should be some way to respond to that legally. Now, the Premier's just opining. There is no plan per se, right? He's saying we're looking into it. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that issue here and what the law says when it comes to trying to create some framework about what types of public displays are appropriate or inappropriate.
Yes, well, the Premier also said that, he wants to prohibit the prayer in the middle of the street, on your knees. And this kind of prayer, Elias, is already prohibited by the laws. It's prohibited by the criminal code. It's prohibited by the bylaws of municipalities. You cannot pray in the middle of the street. This is just illegal. So this is, for me, that part of the story is a scheme, no more than that. As for the rest, when you mention the fact that some people feel that they might be intimidated and all that, this is also prohibited by the criminal code. You can't act like that in Quebec in any way. And if that's the case, well, the police will arrest you at one point, and you're going to have to face the justice. For that second part, though, it's a scheme as well. So what's left? Prayers in the park, okay? Is that a real problem in the sense that we see many religious communities, Catholic, for instance, who are praying in park in other public space, and we don't see any problem with that. So will the Parliament use the notwithstanding clause for something that does not exist? Clearly, I'm not sure it's a good idea to go that way.
So, Frédéric, here's the issue, right? And what I hear and what I see with my very own eyes. The police aren't making arrests. And the police have been on this on CJD. I've heard the chief of police, Fadi Daguerre, on with Aaron Rand in the afternoons, right? And he says, listen, we're handcuffed, pardon the pun. He's pointing to previous court rulings where they can't use mechanisms to arrest protesters. They can't use mechanisms to make sure protesters aren't wearing face coverings. And then the bottom line is we are not seeing arrests. So is it fair for a government to say the current laws, they cannot be enforced, so we need to implement a further law?
Well, frankly, I think that the chief of police did lie to you in a way, because I think that everyone is trying to saving, whatever, right? Because take a look at the criminal code. You cannot intimidate people. It's prohibited already. You cannot go in the middle of the street and block the traffic. You can't do that. You cannot throw things on the windows as they did like 2 weeks ago. And if the police did arrest only 2 or 3%, it's because they didn't do their job. Because the law is clear, and it's the criminal code. And frankly, the criminal code is way more serious, way more important, way more, how may I put it, clear than any kind of bill that would be enacted by the Parliament of Quebec, saying that you cannot pray in the public space. And if we're just taking a look at that, it's not the prayer that is the problem itself. It's the violence that goes with it.
Yes.
And that type of violence is I'm repeating myself.
It's already illegal. I know. So this is the thing, Frédéric. We're with Frédéric Berard. He's a constitutional lawyer, and we're talking about any notion of banning prayer, some of the things that we heard from the Premier last week. I guess this is what we're getting to, Frédéric. And and François Legault has said this, right? He's talking about Quebec values, protecting Quebec values.
Yeah.
But here's what happens, right? In a society like ours, we're in a Western liberal democracy that likes to preach about tolerance. There's something called the tolerance paradox. If you tolerate everything, you end up tolerating nothing. Like if we want to fast track to women having less rights, well, let's invite religion further into society. That's my personal belief. So what are the things, because we also have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and I see often judges rule that certain rights come ahead of others, right? What are the mechanisms that a government can do in good faith to try and protect a society's values?
Well, I don't agree with the last part of your statement. I agree with the rest, but not that. I agree with the fact that the society cannot be tolerant in a way that it becomes like ridiculous and it goes the other way. We all agree on that. But it's untrue to say that the judge ruled that some rights are above the others. All the rights that are protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and also the Quebec Charter of Rights are in a way equal. And sometimes they are contradicting each other, right? So the role of the judge, the role of the justice is to find some kind of how may I put it, an equilibrium.
A balance.
Sorry, I was looking for the word. Some kind of balance between this and between that. So let's take the freedom of religion, for instance. The freedom of religion, it's important. It is protected. It is protected in international documentation that the Canada signed and Quebec signed as well, and all that. But the freedom of religion does not permit you to throw like rocks in the window. Does not permit you to insult somebody with some kind of violent speeches. Cannot permit you to block the street or whatever we already discussed. So I'll have to say that those rights are protected. They are equals. Finding the balance is not always an easy way. And I would like to add something to what I formerly said. Even though you have a new law from Quebec Parliament, the police officers will not be more like, okay, now we can enact that one, but not the criminal code. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. The criminal code comes from the Parliament of Ottawa, as you know. This is serious. Has to be taken for granted by the police officers, and I would recommend that let's start with that, and then if we have some holes in the criminal code, which I don't see as of now, but if it's the case, let's fill those holes. But frankly, right now, François Legault is trying to make some cheap politics using the notwithstanding clause again in the discussion because he knows that sometimes the Muslims are not very popular, so he's just aiming at that community for the reason that we believe being like trying to make some political gain.
Does it matter to you, Frédéric? We have to wrap up, but does it matter to you if he uses the word Islamist instead of Muslim?
No, I mean Islamist. Islamist is not necessarily a religion, right? It's a political community which is different. So if he talks about Islamists, I don't, well, yeah, whatever, okay, I agree with that. But all that to say that we need to prohibit, Elias, violence. We need to prohibit, like illegal behavior, but we cannot, prohibit an existence by itself.
Listen, Frédéric, we always have great discussions, and today is no exception. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, my friend. All right.
Frédéric Berard is a constitutional lawyer, partner at GBM Lawyers.